Hi there, this is Teri from stampinmagic.com. Welcome back to my channel. For today's project I'm going to show you how I created this lovely card. It uses the stained glass technique to create the flowers, and it also uses a stamp set called Amazing You. Now this stamp set is one of the free items that you can select with a qualifying purchase during our celebration promotion. And this promotion ends on the 31st of March 2018. The card on the right uses our Night of Navy stamping blends, and the one on the left uses our Cherry Cobbler blends. We're going to start with a piece of cardstock vellum, and I'm just going to use my embossing buddy to remove any static or finger residue that's on there. Then I'm going to use my Versamark pad and the flower image from the stamp set, and I'm going to ink that up and stamp it onto my vellum. I'm going to use silver embossing powder today, but you could use any colour for this technique. I'm just covering the image with the powder and then tapping off any excess. And then I'll use my heat tool to melt the powder. I'm going to use my Bermuda Bay Stampin' blends today. Now each colour has a light and a dark marker, and each marker has a bullet tip and a brush tip. So I'm going to turn my vellum over and use the brush tip to colour all over the back of the flower. Then I'm going to take my dark Bermuda Bay marker and add some shadows just at the start of those lower petals. And also on the upper petals just around the centre of the flower. And this is what it looks like. We then need to cut the flower out, and I'm cutting right up against the edge of the embossing. You'll need 3 of these flowers for your card. Before I stamp the main panel, I want to create an imaging sheet that I can use later with the Stampin' jig to help me position the flowers exactly where I want them to be. So I have a thick piece of plastic here, and I've placed my handle in the top left corner, and I'm using StazOn ink to stamp the image down onto the plastic. The only reason I'm using StazOn ink is so I don't smudge it and get it on my fingers. Now my main panel is some of our normal weight Whisper White cardstock, so I'm just using my embossing buddy all over it to remove that static, and then I'm placing my imaging sheet exactly where I want to stamp that first flower, and I'm using Versamark ink. I place my handle back into that top left hand corner and I can remove the sheet, and then I place my stamp into the corner and stamp down onto my cardstock. Again, I'm taking my silver embossing powder and covering the stamped image, removing the excess, and then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. Now for my second image, again I take my imaging sheet and I position that exactly where I want the second flower to be. Now the Stampin' Magic handle goes back into that top left corner of the sheet, and then I can stamp my image down using Versamark again. Now these images will overlap with each other, but in this case I didn't need to mask them. It doesn't matter that they overlap because my vellum flowers will cover them all, so you won't see any of that. The only thing you'll see is the silver foliage on the sides. So I've covered the image with silver embossing powder again, and then I'll heat set that with my heat tool. Now I'm going to repeat that whole process again with my third flower. So I've used my imaging sheet to get the placement where I want it. I've stamped with Versamark, covered with silver embossing powder, and then heat set with my heat tool. The next thing we have to do is stamp the sentiment. So I've already created my imaging sheets to use for the placement of this. So I'm just working out where I want it to be, and then my handle again goes in that top left corner. And I'm going to use Versamark and again emboss with silver embossing powder. For the next part of the sentiment, I'm going to use Bermuda Bay ink, and I already have my imaging sheet ready, so I'm just lining that up where I want it to stamp, positioning my handle in that top left corner, and then inking up my stamp and stamping it onto the card. And then I'll repeat that for the final part of the sentiment. We can now start putting our card together. I have a thick Whisper White card base and a layer of Bermuda Bay. So I'm adding adhesive to the back of my white stamped layer, and I'm using Tombow multi-purpose adhesive. I do prefer this glue. I prefer a wet glue to a dry glue, mainly because you get that few seconds wiggle room once you've placed it, so you can adjust the position. And then I'm going to add more glue to the back of my Bermuda Bay layer, and I'll add that to the front of my base card. And finally we get to position the flowers. Now on two of them I'm going to add a dimensional to the back, and then on the third one I'm going to add a couple of glue dots. So I'll position the one with the glue dots first, and I'm just lining it up with the stamped image underneath, and then I'll add the two with the dimensionals so they're raised a little higher off the card. And that's it, my card's finished. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Bye for now.